From illicit deals to financial misconduct, the countries in this video have earned notoriety for their high levels of corruption. Backroom deals, embezzlement schemes, you name it, we will explore the impact of corruption on governance, economy, and society at large. From the challenges of food insecurity to erosion of public trust, we will delve into the multifaceted consequences of corruption and its far-reaching effects on the lives of ordinary people. Join us as we uncover the murky world of corruption in the top 5 most corrupt countries in the world, where truth is a rare commodity and justice is a distant dream. Starting at number 5, we have Yemen. Corruption in Yemen is not a problem. It's a significant and deeply entrenched issue that affects every aspect of Yemeni society. According to the 2023 Corruption Perceptions Index, Yemen ranks a dismal 176 out of 180 countries, making it the most corrupt country on the Arabian Peninsula. This unfortunate distinction is not a positive indicator of the country's development and stability, as it threatens to crumble under the weight of corruption. The systemic nature of corruption in Yemen is pervasive, permeating both public and private sectors. From government officials to business leaders, no one is immune to its influence, as it continues to weaken governance and undermine public trust. Corruption in Yemen has also worsened the social and economic inequalities, stealing from the poor to enrich the powerful, leaving ordinary Yemenis struggling to survive. Moreover, corrupt practices often further erode at Yemen's already dire humanitarian situation, particularly affecting vulnerable populations such as children and internally displaced persons, causing unnecessary pain and suffering. The diversion of public funds and resources away from essential services extends to the healthcare sector, where patients often have to pay bribes to receive adequate medical treatment. Doctors and hospital staff may demand illicit payments in exchange for expedited care or access to essential medications. This corrupt practice not only puts vulnerable individuals at risk, but also public health challenges, particularly in the context of ongoing humanitarian crisis and disease outbreaks, are getting increasingly worse. Yemen's acute challenges, including an exceptionally high birth rate, acute child malnutrition rates, and rapidly depleting reserves of oil and water, create fertile ground for corrupt actors to exploit vulnerabilities, making an already bad situation even worse. As a result, corruption becomes not only a symptom of Yemen's underlying issues, but also a significant barrier to addressing them effectively. Number 4 on the list is Venezuela. Since the discovery of oil in Venezuela in the early 20th century, corruption has persisted. Oil wealth brought prosperity, but it also brought greed and unleashed a torrent of corruption that's plagued the country ever since. Instead of using their power for good, political elites have used it to line their own pockets, leaving ordinary Venezuelans to fend for themselves. The people of Venezuela are fed up with corruption, and who can blame them? Venezuela's Corruption Perception Index score has dropped by 7 points in 10 years. No wonder there have been massive protests like the ones in 2017 and 2019 that shook the country to its core. Transparency International's 2023 Corruption Perceptions Index paints a bleak picture of Venezuela's corruption, giving it a measly score of 13 out of 100. In simpler terms, Venezuela ranks 177th out of 180 countries, meaning it's near the bottom of the barrel when it comes to honesty and integrity, and sinking deeper into corruption with every passing day. In recent years, Venezuela has experienced severe food shortages due to economic mismanagement and corruption. In response, the government launched food aid programs to distribute essential goods to the population. However, reports emerged of corrupt officials diverting food aid meant for the needy and selling it on the black market at inflated prices. Some officials were even found hoarding food supplies in warehouses while people went hungry, leading to public outrage and protests. The economic impact of corruption in Venezuela has a terrible effect on the country's finances. Mismanagement of public funds, embezzlement and bribery have drained Venezuela's coffers dry, with corrupt officials stealing from their own people. And the consequences are dire. Inflation is through the roof, the economy is in shambles, and the ordinary Venezuelans are struggling to make ends meet. But corruption isn't an economic issue, it's a social one too. It's feeding off the most vulnerable members of society, leaving them destitute and desperate. With resources siphoned away from essential services like healthcare and education, the ones who suffer the most are the ones who can least afford it: women, children, and indigenous communities, left to fend for themselves in a system rigged against them. On to the top 3 on our list. Number 3 is Syria. Syria also got a pitiful score of 13 out of 100 on the Corruption Perceptions Index in 2023, showing just how deep the problem runs. This means Syria is seen as one of the most corrupt countries in the world, a label no nation wants to wear. During the Syrian civil war, corruption reached new heights, fueling conflict and hindering efforts to achieve peace. To make matters worse, Syria was also involved in illegal activities like drug trafficking, earning it the infamous title of narco state from the United States. Corruption just doesn't stop at the government's doorstep. It infiltrates the courts and security apparatus too. Bribes and extortion are rampant, especially for families with loved ones behind bars. Corrupt officials demand payment before they'll lift a finger to help. Guards, judges, and other officials are all part of this corrupt system, preying on the vulnerable and powerless. Many Syrians say they are forced to pay bribes just to navigate daily life. Syria has also faced chronic fuel shortages due to economic sanctions and distributions in oil production. In response, corrupt officials and smugglers have capitalized on the shortage by establishing illegal networks for smuggling gasoline and diesel fuel across borders. This illicit trade not only deprives the Syrian government of much-needed revenue, but also contributes to the environmental degradation and increases the country's economic woes. The consequences of corruption in Syria are devastating. Money that should be used to help the country's people is instead pocketed by greedy officials, leaving ordinary Syrians struggling to make ends meet. And with the trust in government at an all-time low, efforts to rebuild and move forward are constantly stalled, and corruption is eroding the very fabric of Syrian society. The second spot goes to South Sudan. From the highest levels of government to the lives of ordinary citizens, corruption hinders South Sudan's growth and development at every turn, perpetuating violence and human rights issues. Despite efforts to address corruption, it continues to plague South Sudan, undermining the government's ability to maintain law and order. This has created a breeding ground for violence, with armed groups taking advantage of the chaos to further their own agendas. But it's difficult to ask for help from a government you don't trust. Even those who try to help South Sudan, like the aid workers, are not immune to the dangers of corruption. They face attacks and threats, making it challenging to deliver the much-needed assistance to those who need it most. The World Bank's project to clean up the government's payroll is a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. By using biometrics to verify the identity of recipients, it aims to ensure that public funds are not squandered or misappropriated. However, this is just one piece of the puzzle. South Sudan must also strengthen its institutions and establish a robust legal framework to hold corrupt individuals accountable. South Sudan's vast natural resources, including fertile agricultural land and mineral deposits, have made it a target for land grabbing by corrupt elites and foreign investors. In some cases, corrupt officials have been accused of colluding with multinational corporations to illegally acquire land from indigenous communities through coercion, bribery, or forced land titles, displacing local populations and worsening the social tensions. One of the biggest challenges to combating corruption in South Sudan is its close ties to violence and instability. When people lose faith in the government's ability to protect them, they may turn to armed groups for security. This perpetuates a cycle of violence and corruption, creating a vicious cycle that is difficult to break. And now, for the most corrupt country in 2024, Somalia. From the bustling ports to the bustling airports, corruption has infiltrated every aspect of Somali society, leaving honest citizens to fend for themselves. With a paltry score of just 12 out of 100 on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, Somalia's reputation as one of the most corrupt countries in the world is well deserved. This pervasive corruption has dire consequences for the country, leading to widespread suffering and hardship. One of the most pressing issues worsened by corruption in Somalia is food insecurity. With nearly half of the population struggling to put food on the table, millions of Somalis are facing hunger and malnutrition, leaving people hungry and desperate. Another pressing issue is piracy in the Horn of Africa, particularly off the coast of Somalia, fueled by the country's instability and lawlessness, followed by the collapse of its central government in 1991. Somali pirates, often former fishermen, exploit the absence of maritime law enforcement to hijack vessels and demand ransom payments. Operating in small, fast boats armed with weapons, they target cargo ships, oil tankers, and luxury yachts, disrupting global maritime trade and posing a significant threat to international shipping lanes. The response to piracy has involved naval patrols, private security escorts, and legal frameworks for prosecuting pirates. But the problem persists due to the persistence of the root cause, poverty and instability. The impact of piracy extends beyond economic losses, to include displacement of coastal communities, disruption of fishing activities, and perpetration of violence and lawlessness in the region. The consequences of corruption in Somalia are far-reaching and devastating. It's not just about missing meals or skipping school. It's about the erosion of trust in government institutions and the breakdown of social cohesion. When corruption is rampant, it undermines the very fabric of society, leaving ordinary Somalis feeling powerless and forgotten. Finally, we have a surprise-worthy mention. North Korea is often cited as one of the most corrupt nations worldwide, finding itself ranked 172nd out of 180 countries in Transparency International's 2022 Corruption Perceptions Index. It is not just isolated to a few individuals. Reports suggest that the corruption extends from the highest echelons of power down to the lowest ranks of the bureaucracy. Astonishingly, corruption even infiltrates critical sectors such as the military and diplomatic corps. In North Korea, routine bribery is a way of life for many officials, serving as a means to supplement their income. In fact, illicit earnings from these practices often surpass or entirely replace their meager government salaries. This widespread acceptance of bribery perpetrates a culture of corruption that touches nearly every aspect of society. Moreover, North Korea's entrepreneurial class collaborates with government officials in various illegal or semi-legal schemes, using state resources for their own private gain. This collusion further entrenches corruption within the country's economic and political structures. The North Korean regime also engages in illicit activities abroad, bolstering its coffers through cybercrime, insurance fraud, counterfeiting, and drug trafficking. These endeavors not only generate substantial revenue for the regime, but also serve as tools for exerting influence and maintaining control. The regime's involvement in such illicit enterprises further undermines international norms and contributes to regional instability. These activities are often shrouded in secrecy, making it challenging for outside observers to fully grasp the extent of North Korea's illicit operations. If you've learned something in today's episode, don't forget to hit that like button, click subscribe, and turn on our post notifications for more.